Thanks everyone for coming. Welcome to Endpoint session number 2. This is going to cover rapidly evolving topics around MEV. I'm hoping to have a very thought-provoking discussion. Let's make some introductions. I'm Mo. I work as the lead developer at Bebop. It being a DEX and being in this space requires you to be constantly keeping up with this topic. Maybe we can start introductions for the panelists. I guess we can start from the left here. Alex?
I'm Alex Nezlobin. I used to be a professor at the London School of Economics, but I'm now working on my own startup. We are in stealth mode, but we will be trying to solve the problem with loss versus rebalancing that I've been writing a lot about.
Hi everyone, Tomasz Stanczak from Nethermind, but also working a lot with Flashbot's team on MEV problems and solutions. Working a lot in the core development around the Ethereum space, L2s, L1, few other things.
Hey everyone, I'm Stefan. In a past life, I founded a company called Flashbots, designed something called MEV-geth and MEV-boost, and put a blog post out that talked about the MEV supply chain, and now a lot of people talk about it too, which is fun. More recently, I'm a founder at a company called Frontier Research, and yeah, we work with a variety of different people in the space who are building within the MEV ecosystem and help propel the space forward.
Hi everyone, my name's Felix. I'm part of Wintermute's DeFi team, and basically, the DeFi team at Wintermute works on anything that's related to on-chain trading. So we trade on AMMs, we quote on RFQs, we trade on central limit order books, and I guess since the start of this year, we've always also been involved in block building.
Thank you. So
What?
That wasn't public, was it? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that's great to get some context around your role in MEV as well. We'll get straight to the topics. The format is that we're going to cover some interesting threads on MEV that have come up and kind of create a space for some interesting thoughts from the panelists. We'll get straight into the first topic here, which is around block building, and this question here from Alex: who makes more blocks 5 years from now?
What's the difference between 3 and 4? Am I right?
Yeah, need to be careful on that one. Yeah, I'd like the panelists to take a side and kind of present their case for how we end up there and potentially any alternatives to that end game. Who wants to start?
Yes, so I certainly don't think it's going to be a Citadel builder. And I generally think that we should move in the direction where people who trade don't build blocks. Or at least maybe they trade and build blocks and but don't get private order flow. So this whole combination of having a private order flow, building blocks, and trading at the same time, I think that we should try to minimize that. And I hope that's not the last time I'm invited to Wintermute. I still wanted to say it. Everyone would be in a more comfortable position if they didn't have to wear so many hats at the same time. When I'm talking about Citadel in particular, I think one of the issues is that big US firms would probably not even be able or willing to do it because of the significant legal risks of insider trading and whatnot. So I have written about it a little bit. So my hope is that maybe Uniswap builder, maybe we design protocols that don't require people who trade to build and people who build to trade. That's my hope, but it's hard to tell if it will materialize.
Well, I would say that, first of all, I think block building in 5 years from now will look very different than what it is today. And I think so far we've seen that trading companies happen to also be very good at building blocks, and I would assume that element kind of stays the same. So if I had to pick one of these 4 options, I'd go with the Citadel builder, but I don't think it'll be like a single entity running that builder. I think it's more like companies or actors in the space that are involved in trading on all of these different chains and protocols will also tend to be very good at building blocks, or at least parts of a block. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Is this going to create a centralizing effect?
I'm not sure if it will be a centralizing effect if you think about the world now. So how would you judge that traditional finance is totally centralized? There is few leading operators, but probably hundreds or thousands smaller players that have different roles in the ecosystem. And just recreating that wouldn't be bad if you can avoid any erosion of that system. So that system, let's say it, at least at some times, it operated very well. And then every now and then there is this totally explosive out of control situation when everything collapses, and after a year or two it just cleans itself. So maybe if you can smoothen those effects a bit, that'll be great. Is it unavoidable that the TradFi operators who experience will be there? This will be a mix of teams. So the experience from on-chain of simulating, verifying, that's engineering experience, understanding of the paradigm and changes. Those people team up with those that have years of experience of TradFi. In the end, it is valuation, pricing models that you have, the quality of those, the SEX-DEX arbitrage. As long as majority of volume will be on the centralized exchanges, then this is where the more traditional companies specializing. If it's on-chain, then you have to have new approach, which means there's more opportunities for new entrants to dominate the market.
Great. And I think this leads into where I want to bring Felix in to present sort of the opposing argument. Even though you're a builder that does CeFi, DeFi arbitrage on as a market maker, do you see a role for a neutral builder? And what opportunities do they have to sustain in this kind of environment and potentially become even market leaders?
So basically, I'd say the only builders I'd consider truly neutral will probably be Flashbots. They just have every single searcher probably submits to Flashbots and Builder 69. And then basically a lot of the other builders either have a lot of small builders are actually run by small searcher teams, which have one specific type of strategy and then win a block every now and then. And I think, for example, Titan Builder is an example of a builder that doesn't have private SEX-DEX bundle flow, at least as far as I know. I think Titan guys are also here today. And I think basically for a neutral builder, the strategy has to be to attract enough order flow to overcome that initial hurdle and acquire enough market share, though, so that searchers are basically somewhat forced to submit to you, and that hurdle might be 7.5% or 10% market share, something like that. And after you overcome that initial barrier to entry, I think it's about basically thinking about different actors in the space. So, for example, non-atomic MEV searchers care about latency, so they have to have a very performant setup. And atomic searchers probably really care about atomicity. So you have to make sure that doesn't break. So I think there's still CeFi DeFi flow is a big advantage for a builder, but I also the majority of blocks our builder builds do contain trades from us, but there's also a large part of blocks which don't contain a single trade from Wintermute, for example. And that varies with market volatility, obviously. When it's high, the number might be 2/3 of blocks we build contain our trades, or when it's low, it's maybe half of the blocks we build. So I think it's the reason these integrated searcher builders have been so dominant is that basically properties that trading firms care about also happen to be very, very valuable in block building in general. And I just the builder space has become a lot more competitive over the last 6 months, and I think there's still enough room for non-integrated builders to innovate and carve out an edge. Also because there are a lot of people doing CeFi DeFi arbitrage, and these people also submit to all builders. So it's not it's only Wintermute or like some other entity that does these trades and has access to this kind of flow.
Dan Robinson says here, please do not increase the Ethereum block time. Tomas and Stefan.
I disagree with them.
Okay, that'll be good then. Do you know like where these proposals come from and why now? I guess it's a question for both of you.
I don't know why Dan decided to tweet this, but this is something that we've been talking about for a while. One is the inevitability of it, and then two is it desirable? I think it's incentive compatible to extend block times, and I think it's desirable to extend block times. And it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek argument, which is the less DeFi there is on mainnet, the more decentralized it will be. And so let's actually make it a really bad UX for DeFi and force it to go somewhere else so that the base layer can actually remain decentralized.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly it seems that there's going to be a very contentious debate. As kind of people who work on the protocol level and have done, Stefan and Tomas, how do you sort of balance the needs of kind of the application level, like DEXs, and then the protocol level requirements in terms of decentralization, neutrality, etc.? How do you think about that?
I definitely approach it from a perspective of the core development responsibilities. That the application layer is just a bit of a series of user requests for the product, but what you're prioritizing for is the general security of the chain, long-term resilience of the chain, the major metrics of like decentralization of the chain against adversarial players. So as long as this is satisfied and you didn't miss some like very critical requirements, this is fine. And I would leave there the DeFi space application development to other ecosystem players.
Anything on your side, Stefan?
You keep saying this is a debate. But there's just going to be longer block times. It's inevitable. It's not a debate. I mean, we can talk about it, but it's going to happen.
Can you explain why? Can you just like go through that process? I think you stated it, but I've not personally heard the reasoning.
The incentive to delay block proposals are too strong to prevent it. And so it will happen one way or another. I think we are lucky that it creates a worse UX for DeFi users. In fact, I think it's great because it's kind of like the snake eating its own tail that forces us to innovate and create like better solutions. And so we will move a lot of this volume to other layers that are going to have other properties. And that's great. And it's great that we're going to have longer block times. So I'm really excited for it.
We actually have a proof that the longer block times are leading to no DeFi because Bitcoin has 15 minutes blocks and no DeFis.
Yeah, maybe for Tomas as well, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts, especially when it comes to the block time wars. Like phrasing this question only in the context of block times, right? I think there are also like interesting alternatives, like even with longer block times, right? Where you can have like permissionless credible commitment devices or whatever, or even like splits of the block into multiple parts, wherever that happens, right? Lots of proposals, obviously, to do it on the relayer level, even like top-up block auctions, rest of block auctions, right? So, I mean, I guess it's also a question of any kind of negative externality. Do you think they can be handled through other means as well, even if we have longer block times, where basically you can have credible commitments, maybe with like Suave plus Pepsi or whatever, to basically handle some of these potential negative results out of that? How do you see that comparison and kind of like looking at the question outside of purely block time?
Yeah, so exactly the credible commitments here would be this pre-confirmation set where you produce multiple L2 blocks on L1. This is I absolutely agree. The longer block times from from the perspective of that single chain, if you just don't look at any other mechanism, this is worse for DeFi. You want to have as short block times as possible. If you can go for 100 milliseconds, go. But obviously then you cannot decentralize, because practically anything below around, 1 second, and you can no longer do the propagation of blocks between the continents. So you cannot have decentralization across continents. Maybe slightly less, but that's why I keep 4 seconds per the communication layer. You asking if with longer block times we can use other mechanisms, like something off-chain or some advanced constructs. That's what we do. So we are being forced to introduce those mechanisms very often just because the block times are too long. When we're reaching these levels of like tens of milliseconds, then it means the traders spend most of the time just like simulating and pushing transactions with all the latency, and some operations are simply too slow to execute. The slower the blocks, the more we explore the complex constructs. The shorter the block times, we start to limit to reach the limits of technology. It means that we don't have to introduce them, but it's all relative to maybe like time of propagation of messages. Like if we somehow invent some solution to propagate messages around the world in 1 millisecond, which is not possible until we break the speed of light, then these limits will be just affecting us of what we can construct at what areas. So yeah, that's why we introduced SWAP. That's why we introduced pre-confirmations, credible commitments, Pepsi. So all the constructs that all of those are about proposer promising something to happen at the next block or at this block that they're about to produce, but in chunks already. It's known in advance, and it can do some like intermediary settlements.
So we're making the block times longer so that we can make credible commitments that they will be shorter.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Just making sure I followed.
Just kind of additional tweet from Dean here, which kind of references that we should, potentially go back to what the mempool was. I mean, should we go back that far? Or should we roll it back that far? And yeah, I'm just kind of trying to open it up and ask all the panelists here. What were the success? Were there successes? What were they? And what were the failures? And any lessons you have from them?
I feel that definitely lots of things that we consider toxic nowadays would happen without all those projects, without MEV-Geth, without MEV-boost, and we would know much less about them, and they would stay maybe with the traditional finance operators. And by introducing this concept, talking about them a lot, introducing the democratization mechanism, we allowed for more understanding, more transparency in all of this. We allowed for new entrants. And democratized access, it doesn't mean that we'll be just equally distributing everything. It just means that those who are better skilled will not have barriers of entry. And that was the idea of MEV-Geth to much extent, like to bring on board more searchers. And over time, those more skilled amass more capital, more skill, more talent, and they're winning now, and we're observing it. Well, it's a bit like with saying that horse-based transport was a mistake because now everyone uses cars. No, you just keep progressing, evolving with the solutions. We're learning on the way, and now there are new challenges. There are different levels of volume. There are L2s, so we start to combine those solutions into something more complex, but we're learning on the way. Arbitrum is planning to go back to that fight in the mempool. But every time someone talks about fighting in the mempool and about decentralization, then they start talking about private mempools. But then with private mempools, we can lose a lot of efficiency unless we just introduce some processing inside the private environment. You can split the blocks into multiple parts, as I mentioned. So some privacy, some fight in the open. So I think we are in a better place. And coming back to Children of Dune, I don't know, massive spoiler, but the planet changed into a green planet, and it was no longer possible to extract a lot of value from it. So if you interpret it this way, then it's better.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, Yeah, the tunnel got shorter. Still dark.
Would we be better off with the mempool? No, we wouldn't. We can't go back. We can't go back, and anybody that tries, runs into issues as well. I think this transition was inevitable. I think some of the intense stuff is, for me, the light at the end of the tunnel. It's the things I get the most excited about. As much as we don't really know what intents are right now, I think it is the design space, the novel design space for building applications that abstract away all the complexity of what we're doing. The fact, all this infrastructure that we're building around MEV, at the end of the day, it is to make crypto more usable and better to use. And we're wrestling with the challenges that open and permissionless systems introduce. It's just a transition phase that the space has to go through as it matures. I don't regret any of the things that have been built. And I think even though we haven't achieved sort of the perfect solution, just the fact that, now we have not just this room, but rooms like this all around the world with thousands of really smart people that are thinking about these problems is something that there wasn't 3 years ago. And for me, that's the real path dependency, is the number of people that care about these problems and are experimenting and trying to solve them.
You cannot compete against an F1 driver if you're only allowed to open your eyes every 12 seconds. You will probably lose. But to make this point obvious, you actually have to compete in this race, and you have to see what happens. And so I think that with these innovations, the MEV problem became much more obvious to everybody, because people were seriously thinking that, hey, they can make money by passively providing liquidity and just enjoying life and getting yield and whatnot, right? So now I think there is the understanding of the problem. And when we come up with solutions, we have to be ready for the solution to be abused in each and every way. And so the sooner we see the abuse, the sooner we can come up with the next thing. So I certainly think that we're just making the progress much faster this way, even though there is, yes, more abuse, but we should have seen that a few years ago. We didn't, but now we know what to work on.
All right. Great. Thanks all panelists. That was great.
Thank you.